The mud clung to his fur like a death sentence. It was the middle of a stormy morning when Alan's truck screeched to a halt by the side of an isolated rural road. Rain fell in thick sheets, blurring the windshield and flooding the uneven gravel. He hadn't planned to stop. He was already late for work. But something in the corner of his eye made his stomach twist. At first, he thought it was just another mound of soaked debris. But then it moved, just barely. Alan blinked, wiped the fog from the inside of the glass, and squinted again. It wasn't debris, it was a dog, a golden retriever almost completely submerged in a thick patch of roadside mud. Only its face and one paw were visible, trembling and twitching with the barest hint of life. Alan's heart began to race. He threw the door open, boots sinking into the swampy ground as he ran toward the motionless body. The closer he got, the more horrifying the scene became. The dog wasn't just stuck, it had been left there, buried under weight and wet earth. Its fur was caked with layers of grime, blood, and filth. Its eyes, barely open, stared up with a haunting mix of pain and resignation. It didn't bark, it didn't move, it had already accepted death. Alan dropped to his knees beside the animal. Hey, come on, buddy, stay with me." He reached out, hands trembling, brushing away the muck around the dog's face. Its breathing was shallow, rapid. Every second mattered. With his bare hands, Alan began digging. The cold, wet earth fought him. The roots tangled around the dog's body were like claws holding him down. Alan's knuckles scraped against stones, but he didn't stop. The rain poured harder, turning the ground into sludge. The dog let out a weak sound, somewhere between a whimper and a sigh. That was all it took. Alan worked faster, more desperately, calling out to the dog over and over, like his voice alone could hold back death. Minutes passed like hours until finally, he pulled the animal free. The dog collapsed into his arms like a lifeless sack of bones. He was nothing but skin, soaked fur, and ribs. Alan wrapped his coat around the animal, shielding it from the downpour as best he could, and rushed back to the truck. Inside, he turned the heat up to maximum, gently laying the dog on the passenger seat. He looked so fragile, so broken. Alan could barely believe he was still alive. His hands were shaking as he dialed the nearest emergency vet clinic. The storm distorted the signal, making the call nearly impossible to complete. But he didn't care about the static or the yelling voice on the other end. He just needed directions. Fast. As he drove through the rain, windshield wipers working overtime, Alan glanced over at the dog. His head lolled against the seat. His breathing was faint, but steady, for now. Alan had no idea what had happened to him. Who could do something like this? Who could bury a living, breathing soul and leave them to die? He gripped the steering wheel tighter. He didn't know the dog's name. He didn't know his story. But one thing he knew for sure. He wasn't going to let him die today. The rain had eased slightly, but the urgency in Alan's chest only grew heavier as he sped down the narrow road toward the vet clinic. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Every few seconds, his eyes darted to the passenger seat where the golden retriever lay, curled in a soaked ball, wrapped in Alan's jacket. The dog hadn't made another sound. His breaths came in shallow, irregular bursts, each one slower than the last. Alan spoke to him in whispers, his voice cracking. "Stay with me, buddy. Don't give up. You've made it this far. You're not alone anymore." But the dog didn't respond. His eyes remained half-lidded, vacant, as though his soul was already teetering at the edge, deciding whether to keep holding on or finally let go. Alan knew they were running out of time. The truck skidded slightly as he turned onto the gravel lot of the vet clinic, a modest building on the outskirts of town, its lights flickering in the haze of the storm. He jumped out before the engine even stopped, scooping the dog gently into his arms, careful not to jostle his limp body. The staff inside rushed to meet him at the door, their eyes widening in shock as they saw what he carried. Golden Retriever, maybe a year old, was buried in mud. Still breathing, but barely, Alan managed to gasp. The receptionist hit the emergency button behind the desk while a vet tech appeared with a gurney. As they lifted the dog from Alan's arms, something inside him cracked. It felt like he was handing over more than a broken animal. It felt like he was surrendering the life of someone who had chosen, against all odds, to hold on until he showed up. Alan had no idea why it hurt so much. But watching the dog disappear behind the swinging doors felt like something sacred being torn away. The waiting room was cold and sterile. Alan sat alone, his clothes soaked, his boots caked with mud, his hands still trembling. Every few minutes, he wiped his palms on his jeans, but they wouldn't stop shaking. 30 minutes passed. Then, an hour. The rain had finally stopped, but the storm inside his chest only swelled. When the vet finally returned, her expression was a mix of exhaustion and awe. "He's stable, barely," she said. "We had to warm him slowly, treat him for shock and start him on fluids. He's severely malnourished and anemic. We don't know how long he was out there, but if you hadn't found him when you did—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Alan nodded silently, his throat tight. "I don't know who did this," he muttered. "But whoever they are, they left him to die." The vet's expression darkened. "Unfortunately, it happens more than people think. But this one, he fought to survive." Alan was allowed into the recovery room, where the dog lay on a soft blanket under heat lamps. His breathing was steadier now, but he was still too weak to lift his head. Wires ran from his frail body to machines that beeped slowly, rhythmically. Alan knelt beside him, brushing a strand of fur off the dog's closed eyes. "You made it, buddy," he whispered. "You really made it." And then, for the first time since being rescued, the dog moved. Not much. Just the twitch of a paw, the barest movement of his nose toward Alan's hand. But it was enough. Alan smiled through tears. It was the beginning of something. They didn't know it yet, not the vet, not Alan, not even the broken golden retriever lying there under the lights. But this wasn't the end of a tragedy. It was the start of a transformation. But outside the clinic, in a part of town no one ever talked about, someone else had noticed the dog's disappearance. Someone who had tried to bury their cruelty beneath the mud. And they weren't happy to know he had survived. The days that followed were filled with a cautious kind of hope. The dog, who the vet staff had begun calling Chance, remained in critical care for the first 48 hours. He didn't move much, he didn't eat, but he breathed. And that alone felt like a miracle. Alan visited every day. He would sit next to Chance's cage, sometimes for hours, speaking in a quiet voice about anything and everything. His job at the auto shop, the way the sun had finally broken through the storm clouds, or how he'd always wanted a dog as a kid, but could never have one. And though Chance remained silent and still, Alan swore that the dog heard him. Then came the third day. Alan walked into the clinic, like usual, bracing for the same stillness, but instead a vet tech rushed up to him, eyes wide. "He stood up," she whispered. "Just for a few seconds, but he stood." Alan practically sprinted to the recovery room. And there he was, Chance, still fragile, his legs trembling like newborn fawns, standing with his head barely lifted, eyes finally open. Those eyes, they weren't vacant anymore, they were watching. Alan dropped to his knees in front of the cage, overcome with emotion. He extended his hand slowly, letting it rest just inside the gate. And this time, Chance didn't flinch. He stepped forward, wobbly, slow, but deliberate. Then he placed his paw on Alan's hand. That one simple gesture, delicate, uncertain, hit Alan like a punch to the chest, because in that moment, he knew. Chance remembered. He remembered the warmth, the rescue, the man who had pulled him from the grave. "You're a fighter," Alan whispered, voice thick. "You were never just surviving. You were waiting." From that day on, Chance's recovery accelerated. He began eating soft food. He started moving more. With each passing day, his body grew stronger, but something else grew with it too. Trust. A bond was forming. Quiet. Steady. Unshakable. But just as the light was returning, darkness stirred elsewhere. That same week, a news report broke about a dog found buried alive near Route 14. The footage was grainy but heartbreaking. An anonymous witness had captured Alan carrying the muddy, unconscious dog to his truck. The story went viral within hours. Local mechanic finds dog left for dead, saves him against all odds. People were moved. Donations poured into the clinic. Volunteers offered to adopt Chance when he was ready. But Alan, he didn't want to give him away. He hadn't said it out loud, not even to the vet. But in his heart, he had already made a decision. Chance belonged with him. Yet behind the screen of public sympathy, someone else was watching. Someone who hadn't expected that dog to be found, let alone survive. And now that the story was everywhere, they were getting nervous. One night, Alan returned home to find a note taped to his front door. "No one cares about a mutt like that. Let it go." There was no signature, no name, just those cold words scrawled in jagged handwriting. Alan stood there, heart pounding, staring at the note. This wasn't over. Whoever had buried Chance wasn't done yet. And Alan wasn't about to back down, because now it wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about justice for Chance and for every animal thrown away like trash. He stepped back into his house, crumpling the note in his fist, and looked at the blanket folded on the couch, the one he was preparing for when Chance was finally strong enough to come home. He would protect him, whatever it took. Alan didn't sleep much after that note. Every sound outside made him tense. Every shadow near his shop seemed longer than it should be. And though the police had taken a report, they were clear. Unless something happened again, there wasn't much they could do. But Alan wasn't worried about himself. He was worried about Chance. The clinic, though protected, didn't have security cameras. And someone out there clearly didn't want Chance to keep breathing. So Alan made a decision, one that shocked the clinic staff. "I'm taking him home," he said firmly. The head vet blinked, surprised. "Alan? He's stable, yes, but still recovering. Are you sure?" Alan didn't hesitate. "He'll be safer with me, and I'll be with him every second." After some intense discussions and final health checks, Chance was released into Alan's care. He was still underweight, his fur was patchy, and he limped with every step. But when Alan opened the passenger door of his truck and whistled, Chance climbed in slowly and laid his head in Alan's lap. The ride home was quiet, but Alan could feel something shift, like the dog had finally understood. He wasn't going back, not to the mud, not to the chains, not to the pain. That night, Alan didn't sleep in his bed. He laid out blankets on the floor next to Chance. And for the first time since the rescue, the dog slept without flinching. But peace wouldn't last. 2 nights later, around 3 a.m., Chance lifted his head and growled. Low, deep, alert. Alan was up in seconds, heart pounding. He heard it too, footsteps, crunching gravel outside. He reached for the bat near the door, crept toward the window, and then he saw it. A figure, hooded, standing just beyond the porch light. Alan stepped out. "Who's there?" he barked. The figure didn't move. Chance stood behind him, body tense, tail stiff. Alan held him back with one hand. The silence was heavy until the figure finally turned and ran. Alan chased, but the man vanished into the darkness. The next morning, the police returned, more serious this time. They placed patrols near Alan's house and took fingerprints from the note left days before. Alan reinforced the windows, changed the locks, installed cameras. But inside, something else was happening. Chance was changing too. The once terrified creature who cowered in corners was now alert, responsive, and deeply protective. He followed Alan from room to room, never more than a few feet away. He no longer whimpered in his sleep. He walked stronger, ate more. And when Alan would sit at his workbench in the garage, Chance would lay by the door, guarding, always watching. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope. No return address, no name. Just a single sentence typed in all caps. The dog saw what he wasn't supposed to. Alan's hands trembled as he read it. This wasn't just cruelty. This was a cover-up. And Chance, he wasn't just a victim, he was a witness. Alan brought the letter to the police, and this time they took it seriously. A detective connected the dots. There had been an illegal dog-fighting ring operating in a rural area outside town. The property had been abandoned months ago after a tip-off, but no arrests had ever been made. Now they had a potential thread. Someone had tried to silence a dog who had likely been one of their former disposables. Alan looked down at Chance, who was resting beside the officer's desk, eyes still alert. He had been thrown away like trash, buried, quite literally, to erase a secret. But he had survived, and now his story was about to bring justice. Just then, the officer's phone buzzed. A search warrant had been approved. The property where Chance had likely been held was going to be investigated again, this time with new evidence, new eyes, and a survivor's story. Alan leaned down, scratching Chance gently behind the ear. "You ready to finish what we started, buddy?" The dog let out a quiet huff. Not fear, not pain, but something close to resolve, because this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about making sure it never happened again. The day of the raid came quietly. No news, no leaks, no chance for anyone to disappear before the truth was exposed. Alan wasn't allowed to join, of course, but he waited anxiously at home, Chance beside him, pacing in quiet circles. His coat had grown thicker now, his body stronger, but his eyes still carried the weight of everything he'd endured. When the call finally came in, it changed everything. "They found it," the officer said. "Fighting pits, bloodstains, cages, dozens of collars, and they found more dogs. Alive." "Barely, but alive." Chance perked up when Alan ended the call, sensing something had shifted. Alan knelt in front of him, both hands on either side of the dog's face. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved them." The media explosion was immediate. Photos of the operation went viral, dogs who had survived unimaginable abuse now being carried into safety. But what grabbed everyone's attention wasn't just the horror they had endured. It was the story of the dog who had been buried alive and returned from the dead to take down the ones who put him there. Alan never wanted the spotlight, but Chance, he became a symbol. Not just of survival, but of justice. A few weeks later, they stood together in front of a crowded auditorium. Animal rights advocates, rescue groups, lawmakers, all gathered for a national awareness campaign. And at the center of it all, one man in a denim jacket and a golden-coated survivor at his side. Alan spoke briefly, voice trembling. "I'm not a hero," he said. "But this dog didn't just survive, he made sure others wouldn't have to go through what he did." The crowd rose to their feet. And Chance, almost as if he knew, stood tall and still, chest out, ears high. His scars were still visible. His limp hadn't fully disappeared. but the fear was gone. He wasn't the same dog who had once clawed through dirt for one last breath. He was something more now. He was living proof that resilience could defeat cruelty, that loyalty could outlast betrayal, that a second chance is sometimes all it takes to change everything. That night, as Alan and Chance walked home from the event, they passed the alley where they first met. Alan paused. Chance did too. He looked toward the shadows, not with fear, but with something stronger. Confidence. Peace. Alan whispered, "Let's go home." And they did. Together. If you believe every soul deserves a second chance, like Chance, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories that will stay with you forever.